Everyone, welcome to our next installment in our Alumni Success series. So, this is a monthly seminar series that is hosted by the Career Development Office. This month, we are very excited to welcome Dr. Michelle Mellenthin, and I will do a little intro in just a second. But before that, I always have to give my little spiel about the Career Development Office and the things that we do. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Hannah Hathaway. I am the program manager of the Career Development Office. The other half of our office is Bruce Mant. He is an associate dean for the graduate school, and then also the director of the Career Development Office. If you have any career-related questions, you are always welcome to make an appointment with either of us for like a one-on-one coaching session, and you can do that through Handshake. And then just ever so quickly, some of the things that we provide through the Career Development Office. Of course, like I mentioned, we have that one-on-one career coaching. So let's say you are applying for a position, you want some feedback on your cover letter, on your resume. We're happy to provide that, especially in the tough job market right now. Please let us help you make your application as competitive as possible. We also provide a number of different workshops throughout the year. Next month, we have a workshop around resumes and CVs that is also going to be on Zoom. So check your email, look out for flyers, things like that if you were interested in attending that workshop. And then we also have a more structured career exploration program. It's almost like a mini class, except it's not for credit. That runs in the spring and the fall. So our next one would be in August, and that's more focused on PhD students and postdocs. But if you are a current PhD student or postdoc and you don't really know what's going to be your next step, I highly recommend you think about joining us for that career exploration program. It's called iSearch. We've gotten great feedback, and we do things like visit different companies, and you can talk to some scientists and figure out how to get your foot in the door. So if you ever want to take advantage of our resources, you can pretty much just Google CU Anschutz Career Development, and our website will pop up. Or you can always send us an email, career.development@CU Anschutz. Okay, enough about the CDO. With that, I am very excited to welcome Dr. Michelle Mellenthin. Dr. Mellenthin has a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering from the Milwaukee School of Engineering and a PhD in bioengineering from Colorado State University. Michelle then joined CU Denver/Anschutz as a T32 postdoctoral fellow. I am fortunate that Michelle and I actually were on campus at the same time as postdocs, and I got to work on like some fun events and little initiatives and stuff with her through Project Bridge and the Postdoc Association and things like that. I remember, I think it was a gong show, maybe you had this cool like demo. I think it was how a lung works, and it was like a cylinder with a balloon or a glove or something, and it was just like really visual and very engaging. That really made a big impact on me, and it also makes a lot of sense while you're having so much success in a teaching focused position. So after CU Anschutz, Michelle moved to Grand Junction, where she accepted a position as an assistant professor and soon to be associate professor at Colorado Mesa University. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm really excited to hear more about your career and your journey so far.
Great, thanks. Happy to be here. And I got a few questions from Hannah in advance about that you guys had put into the RSVP. So I'm going to address at least some of those, and we should have some time at the end. I'm happy to take those questions here. Let's see if I can.
You should be able, if you're not able to share, let me know.
Let me try it this way. Share. Okay.
Perfect.
All right.
Yep, cool.
I can everyone see it? Okay.
Yep.
Great.
Right. I can see, I think I can see the presenter mode. So I can see like.
Sorry, let me change that. There we go.
Good.
Okay, how about that? Better?
There we go. Perfect. Yes.
Awesome. Everyone will be like, you have no notes. And I'll be like, that is true. So not that interesting.
Going from memory. It's good.
So hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. Thanks for the intro, Hannah. I really look back on my time down on the Anschutz campus very fondly. And, coming from a research background to a teaching background was definitely for me, it was the right shift. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about that and try to give you guys some pointers about what will help you make that transition if you decide this is something you want to pursue. So some context, Hannah kind of went through what my degrees are. One thing you'll notice is that all of my experience is very much bioengineering, biomedical engineering, but my current job is actually in electrical and computer engineering. So really my current job is leveraging the skills that I have from bioengineering that are very much, universal to different engineering disciplines. And I'm more of a device person. So for me, electrical and computer engineering is a pretty natural fit. I also do a lot of programming and have done a lot of programming all throughout my graduate school and postdoc time. So for me, teaching programming, teaching devices was kind of a natural thing. I'm happy to take some questions later. I just found out maybe about 2 weeks ago that I got tenure. So happy to talk a little bit about what that process has been. But it's been some time since I've been down on the Anschutz campus, and happy to talk about what teaching is like at a teaching school. For those of you who aren't sure where Grand Junction is, the Grand Junction is actually on the western slope of Colorado. So we are the biggest city. We're about equidistant between Salt Lake and Denver. So we're the biggest city in between those two. The Grand Valley is about maybe over a little over 100,000 people. So when I say big city, it's not really like Denver big or Salt Lake big. It's big for the Western slope, but I would say it's not really that big of a city. I want to give you a little bit of my background about how I knew when I was there that this is what I wanted to pursue. And then I want to try to make sure that I focus most of my time telling you guys and giving you some advice about like, what's in your application, what can you do now maybe to make your application competitive. And then I've actually led 2 search committees and been on, I think, yeah, been on 4 search committees in total. So I've been on my fair share of search committees. So hopefully there are some insights I can give you from the other side of like when we are looking at applications, especially from people coming from a research background, this is what we're looking for. So hopefully those insights will really help you guys. And then whatever specific questions you have, I got a few in advance that I'll answer, but then I'm happy to open it up and take some more questions. So for me in particular, one of the things that kind of a realization I had in during my postdoc time was I had a particularly long week. I had a grant proposal that I was really rushing to get in. And it was stressful. As you guys know, writing grants can be a lot of work, very time consuming, especially when you're learning, right? You're getting a lot of feedback from your mentors. And, I knew when I got to the end, luckily I worked in a great lab with Bradford Smith. And he was like, you should just go camping and get away and recharge for a bit. So I went with some friends out to Moab and out in the desert, which I love the desert. I just kind of like had a couple of just really peaceful moments where I was disconnected from the world and really could just kind of reflect about like, someone had asked me like, what is it that you really enjoy about your job? Like, what is it that motivates you to do what you do? And can you find the next thing that's going to help you do more of that? And so this realization I had when I was out in the desert was like, every morning when I got up out of bed, the thing that was getting me out of bed wasn't necessarily my research projects. It's not that I don't enjoy my own research projects, but I was way more excited about the conversations I was going to have in the lab with the undergrads and the master's students who I knew would probably need my help on their particular project. So I was way more excited to help others than I was about like doing my own project. And I kind of thought about it and I was like, yeah, even if I was sitting there writing code and someone popped in and said, hey, could you help me with this? It was never like a moment of hesitation. I was like, I would welcome their distraction and be like, yes, I would much rather help you figure this thing out than do my own thing. And that might not be the same for everyone, but for me, it kind of like I thought about that, about why that was, and was like, I just really like mentoring. Maybe I don't want to be in an R1 institution. Maybe what I really want to do is put my energy towards teaching. So I will start by saying the start for me was a little rough. I was the first hire in a brand new program. So there's an interesting partnership that exists between Colorado Mesa University and the engineering programs in CU Boulder. So what happens is students are at CMU for the first 2 years. They'll take CMU classes as CMU students. Then they apply to CU Boulder, but they remain in Grand Junction, and they're actually taught by CU Boulder teaching faculty that live in Grand Junction and teach at a small school the engineering degrees. So they get CU Boulder degrees, but they get a small school experience, and then we share resources between CMU and CU, which is pretty cool. So I was hired in the fall of 2019 to start this program. And as you can imagine, starting any new job, especially a teaching job where you're building a brand new program, people had said, the department, like, here are the classes you're going to teach. And you're like, okay. And it wasn't like there was a senior person giving me a binder of like, start here. It was like, we wrote this course description based on what we found online. Can you teach a class in this topic? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. And it went well. But fall 2019 was kind of like the only normal semester I had, kind of to get my feet under me before 2020, and then it was just going through all of that. One thing, to note, like there was this period of time when I was the program, right? I was advising all the students in the program. I was making change. I was making all of the decisions about purchasing equipment and trying to get things up and going. So there was definitely a lot of extra pressure, kind of put the person carrying the world on their shoulders. There were times it felt a little bit like that to get this program off the ground. And I didn't have any luxury necessarily of like a course release. It kind of was like, here are the classes that are required in this program. You are the program. You need to figure out how to teach all these classes. So there were definitely a few things that I got to teach that I was fairly rusty at. So I had to spend a lot of time studying up. But it was very rewarding to develop all of my courses essentially from scratch, figure out what style was very authentic to me. And luckily, the program started with very few students, so I really got to connect with them and could kind of do things on the fly a little bit when I needed to. That being said, in the past 5 to 6 years, I've taught more than 14 different classes, which is quite a few number of different classes to develop. And I will say starting something new is never easy, right? So it was definitely not easy to start this, but it was very rewarding. Being where I'm at now, I feel like I have a lot more perspective on kind of what I've went through and where I've ended up, and it's really been worth it for me. I would say one of the best parts about the job for me at a teaching school is really, it's been about the amazing experiences that I've been able to help students have. And so the one photo in the center here, I'm holding a plaque. This is Students from Engineers Without Borders. I'm the faculty advisor for that club. They had a hard time finding someone who was willing to do it. And I said, all right, yeah, like I can help you do this. We'll figure this out, which is a weird thing, perhaps, to have an electrical and computer engineering person advise a more civil engineering club. But we found a way to make it happen. They got recognized as Club of the Year, actually twice. So it was fun to go with them and go accept their award. I've taken students to the Colorado Robotics Challenge down in the Sand Dunes. So the Sand Dunes National Park has a huge history of actually testing Mars rovers. And so they've been down there with the NASA Space Grant, and we've been testing rovers, which has been really fun. And I actually really enjoy going to graduation. And I always try to get a picture with the students that are graduating. So this is actually me with the very first cohort. It was just two. We lost a few during the pandemic. It was really disruptive to education in general. And then the one up in the upper corner is me with some of the more recent classes. So we've grown a bit in size, which has been good to see. It's, obviously I can say it's a demanding job, but a very rewarding job. One thing I think that's always good to ask when you would interview for a job is to try to understand what are your performance evaluation, like what does that annual criteria look like? So at least at CMU, I can tell you that 60% of the time is teaching. Everyone here likes to joke that 100% of the time is teaching, and then it's really 120% scale, and the other 20% is everything else that you find time to do. But really, 65% of your score is teaching, and then everything else, whether you're advising students, whether it's helping them navigate resumes and cover letters and recommendation letters, or picking out classes. So that kind of all falls in the advising area. Service can be anything from university committees, departmental committees, being a faculty advisor for a club, journal reviewer kinds of things, like kind of service to your field. And then research is a surprisingly low fraction of what it is. So 10 to 25% kind of falls under the research umbrella, and that will really vary from year to year. And research with undergraduates, we don't have any graduate programs here, at least in our department, is very different, I think, sometimes than what we would say like normal research could be. So this could be like pedagogical research, and really it's more broadly defined as a teaching school as being able to demonstrate that you're staying current in the field. So what are you doing to show you're engaging in your field, you're being current in that knowledge? All of that really falls under that research umbrella. CMU has a 12 credit hour per semester teaching load, which is a very heavy teaching load. Typically, that means you teach 4 classes each semester. If you have lab classes, those might count a little differently towards your credit hour load, but you're usually quite busy in terms of teaching. Other universities might have a slightly less teaching load, so it might be 3-3. So I've seen that at other institutions. And usually if it's 3-3, sometimes like the percentages in these performance evaluation areas, might change a little bit if your teaching load is a little bit less. One thing, like I've really enjoyed my job a lot. I work with amazing people. I have great students. But, I will say like small programs can be hard. Specifically moving to Grand Junction, being the first hire in a new program means that you need to be willing to spend free time, Saturdays, Sundays, evenings, learning things so that you can develop and teach classes with the mastery that you know is appropriate, to teach things that are maybe slightly outside of your preferred area or things that would come naturally. So I remember being asked to teach a class in digital logic, and I was like, oh no, it's been a long time since I've had to do that kind of stuff. And like I remember taking a class on it wasn't when I was an undergrad, but that was it. And so I had to go back and relearn all that material. And then after I had convinced myself I knew the fundamentals, it was okay, well, now what is current in the field? And go learn that information as well. So you do teach a bigger breadth of things in a small program, but you get the benefit of really getting to know your students quite well. I will say with this kind of teaching load, a 4-4 in particular, finding time for research is hard, especially since we're paid for our salary is 9 months. So some people will do research over the summer, but to be quite honest, most people don't. Most people take their summers and they have fun with their families. So that ends up being something that's kind of a challenge if what you want to do is research during the school year, not necessarily fill your summer with different research projects. It can be hard to find both what are appropriate projects for undergraduates. Sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge to figure out what is something that can help me make meaningful progress on the area I've decided to work on? How can I create this into a digestible piece for someone at that level? Depending what your area is, sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge. But I've been fortunate that occasionally I can find things that would make great little papers where I can actually say, okay, we're going to build this device in class and we're going to test it in class. And I've actually had a class write a paper that we got published, which was pretty cool. So if you're creative, you can find time for research, but it definitely is something that has taken some time to really kind of get my feet under me and figure out how to make that a reality in the classroom. One thing that I will say, I've talked a lot about kind of the things that were tough getting this going. I think this is true in every career, but work-life balance is always something that you're going to be working towards trying to find. Sometimes the scales tip one way and then they tip the other. But I would say, in this career, some of the best advice that I've had, and I think is really true no matter what career you end up choosing, is give your time and your energy to the things that make the most difference. And so the first year I was here, I was really struggling because I was assigning a lot of homework and then I was grading every homework problem and making quizzes and grading every quiz problem, and nothing was automated. And I finally I met with someone who's in charge with faculty success, and she had said, Michelle, she was like, some really good advice to think about is, are you spending 10 to 15 hours a week grading assignments? Because we don't have any TAs at CMU. are you spending all of your time grading student work that's worth 1% of your grade? Because if it's worth 1% of their grade, it's not a very good use of your time. If you're spending this kind of time grading things that are worth 20 or 30% of their grade, then that feels more fair. And so with that, I've really made strategic changes to how I approach things in class so that the energy that I pour in to developing and grading things really is proportional to what that assignment is worth to students. And I kind of have recalibrated those things. And it's hard. Like you want to have your hands on everything, I think sometimes. But if you have a heavy teaching load, that's not always realistic, especially as your class sizes increase. The other piece of advice I think on that work-life balance front is say yes to the things that interest you, that make you excited, and things that maybe if they don't make you excited, at least are things that make the biggest difference to either the students you're going to teach or your colleagues. Like, are you giving to something that's going to make where you work a better place for yourself, for your peers, for the students? Because those are things that are worth pouring energy into, and kind of balancing those things has made it really a lot more realistic for me to get outside on a nice weekend and really make the most of breaks to, do what you need to do to keep your mental health in a good place. Um, Grand Junction is on the western slope, so we're about a 75 to 80-minute drive from Arches National Park. We're less than 2 hours from Ouray. We have ice climbing in Colorado National Monument. We have fantastic mountain biking. There's insane rock climbing. Like the outdoor stuff out here is really great. So that was one of the draws for coming here. And I really just had to make balancing my work and my life something that allowed me to do all the things that really drew me to the place to begin with. So that's probably enough about me. Hopefully, I can give you guys some advice now about just kind of what you would need to know getting into this kind of position. So, if you're thinking about applying for a teaching specific position, the good news is that the application materials are pretty much going to be the same for a teaching position that, or not even a teaching position, any sort of teaching institution. You're going to have a cover letter. Usually you have a research statement, a teaching statement, and a CV. With the current administration, I'm not quite sure. I know some universities had a DEI statement that you may have wanted to have. I don't know if those will be required anymore, but these four feel like a super safe bet to me. They're not going anywhere. As far as the hiring process is concerned, so you'll basically, when you apply for a particular job, on the university side, they have what's called a search committee. The search committee is usually 3 to 5 faculty members who are going to review your application materials. You'll often find that the chair of the search committee is going to be listed on the job posting. So if you have questions about the job, that's the person you're going to want to contact. And then typically what will happen is you'll have a first round of interviews, and that might be 10 people, for example. The committee will often record the interviews because it's hard to find times to schedule around that many faculty members and whoever they're trying to interview. And then they are going to ask you a certain set of questions. They have a sort of, usually it's maybe 6 to 12 questions, depending on the committee. And they will ask the same set of questions to each person. For like legal reasons, they can't deviate from that. They have to ask everyone the same set of questions. So occasionally you'll get a question that maybe won't apply to you. But where I think you can really take this interview and turn it into something that is really beneficial is to have good questions for the committee. So like if you, just answer their questions, but you have no questions for them, then one, they're not going to think you're very interested in the job. And two, like you can't actually make sure that you get a chance to talk about things that you want to share about yourself. So definitely keep that in mind when you have that phone interview piece. Thinking intentionally about what those questions are and having good ones really puts you in a good position in terms of having a good impression on that search committee. If you make it past the first round of interviews, usually a search committee will bring in anywhere between 2 to 4 other people, and they'll do a second round of in-person interviews. These are pretty intense. Generally, what will happen at a teaching school is you will give a research talk and you will give a teaching demonstration. We've had teaching demonstrations where we've told candidates, we're going to have you teach in one of these classes. Can you teach one of these topics? And we'll give them a specific topic and we'll actually plug them into an actual class so that we can get feedback from the students, as well as faculty who would come in and watch about, your teaching style. Could they connect with you? All of those kinds of things. We've also done teaching demonstrations on other committees I've been on where we just said, give us your best talk, teach us something new. You pick what it is. We would rather listen to what you're comfortable on than maybe the list of topics doesn't quite jive for you. So you could see one or other. You might be given a list of topics. You might just be told to teach something, but generally there's going to be two different presentations you have to give. At least at CMU, we always have our candidates have lunch with students. So we'll pick a bunch of students that we trust their feedback on, and they'll have lunch with you. And then we chat with those students afterwards. And we're like, what did you think? Like, would you want to take a class from this person? What'd you talk about? And it's always really insightful. At a smaller school, especially one like Mesa, we don't really have deans at all. So the candidate will often interview with like VPs up in academic affairs. So um, you would interview with a few people kind of high up in the chain, as well as you would probably have some other meetings with faculty in the department, just so that other people could have another chance to really talk with you. Usually there's dinner involved and other things. That's kind of just common for on-site interviews, but these two different talks are pretty standard for teaching positions. One thing that I think is important to think about is, if you're leaning this way, is one, you want to be aware of the timeline. So a lot of times job openings for the next fall might happen as early as October, November, December, and they will continue to open through the spring as people retire or move on or that kind of thing. But a lot of times, like the most number of positions are going to be available if you're looking late fall, early winter versus sort of this time. That's not to say you can't find something now, but more positions are open kind of November timeframe. One thing that I think is important to think about is if you want to go to a teaching focused school, you want to be able to talk about and convince someone that you have the skills to be successful. And so it's pretty clear, right, from the performance evaluation, you're going to spend a lot of your time in the classroom. So you need to convince the people there that you can teach. And that can look like a lot of different things. I think the best thing you can do during a postdoc to prepare yourself for this career is be the named instructor of a course and teach that whole course. So for me, as a T32 fellow, I talked to the person who was in charge of the grant, and I said, this is a training grant, and I would like to be trained in teaching. Can I teach a class? And they kind of were like, well, if it's training, I'm not going to pay you. And I said, fine. I don't care. I want the teaching experience. And I said, I'm not happy about not getting paid, but fine, I'll do it. And the PI was like, if this isn't going to detract too much from research and you think you're interested in this, like, do it. So if you have a supportive PI and you are in a position where you can be the named instructor of a course, that's good. This isn't to say you need to teach courses every single semester. Teach a class, because at least if you teach one class, you have something to talk about at the job interview. You can be like, okay, I had, this weird situation come up and this is how I handled it, or this is my philosophy and I tried this once and then I learned that I should do this. And you have a little bit more that you can, talk about in an interview, which is really nice. It could be that maybe that opportunity isn't available to you. So I actually taught a class. I was a T32 postdoc in the bioengineering department, so I taught a bioengineering class. But, it could be that there are adjunct opportunities that you could do. And I would just have that conversation with your PI to make sure that, like, I know sometimes some of those training grants are like, you can't have any percent of your time, take away from something else. And I also know that there are situations, right? Like if you're here on a visa, and your visa is with CU Anschutz, you probably can't, take an adjunct job with Metro because there would be some conflicts there. So talk with your PI about how to get that teaching experience, but that would be kind of the best case scenario. If the best case scenario and you're just really deep into the research isn't going to work, but you think this is what you want anyway, one thing that I would do is you can spin other activities, into selling that you have this teaching focus to convince someone you actually want to teach and that you've done it before. So you could try teaching a summer camp. I know they run summer camps in some of the departments down there. See if you can get in on that and do some of the teaching at that camp. You could ask the PI in your lab to try to kind of have some more formal mentoring roles if you aren't already doing that with some of the younger people in your lab. And then you could ask to guest lecture. It's something. Um, you could have, I actually had a job application that I looked at once where someone curated their own YouTube channel where like they worked example problems for students and they talked about how to do things. So they just had their own teaching stuff out there and they included that with their application materials, which I thought was really cool. In general, my experience has been that search committees often prioritize candidates who can demonstrate teaching experience. And that can be interpreted kind of broadly, but it's a little bit easier of a sell if you meet the best case scenario. So I thought I saw a question pop up in the chat. So,
Oh, unmute. There we go. That was me. Sorry, I was just sharing a resource.
ah,
We have like a database through the CDO of teaching opportunities. They're mostly at CU Denver. But that's a good place to look if you were maybe looking for some of those best case scenario options.
definitely. And definitely like it's something where I was like, I think actively teaching a class while I was interviewing for this job. And at least I had something. I was like, I've had 8 weeks under my belt and it's going okay, you know? And they were like, hey, she's a little green, but I convinced them to take a chance on me. So, and it worked out. Um, the rest of these questions are ones that I got from Hannah that people put in. One of them was, are there any extra qualifications required for a teaching job? And, you know, the main thing is really that there's none. However, right, I will say that, you know, teaching experience is strongly preferred. It's not required. We've hired people who have never taught a college class before. But they gave a really great teaching demonstration and they were very compelling in terms of saying mentoring is something I'm very passionate about. This is why I know I'm a good fit for this job. And they're really able to make their case. You know, and then the other thing that they were able to do that I think is really important to think about is, you know, if you just have one base application and you apply to both R1 institutions and teaching institutions, you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice because the research statement for a teaching institution should be quite a bit different. You want to think about, you know, what is feasible for you to actually achieve assuming there is no grad program with undergraduates when you have pretty limited time, like what is something that you want to do? And one of my colleagues and I were talking the other day that sort of the fun thing about this job is that, you know, we don't necessarily have lab spaces here. We can carve out in existing teaching labs project space for kind of interesting projects we have with students, but we don't have a formal lab.
What?
Oh, was there a question? Okay. So that's something that I think is kind of interesting to note. And then the other thing with the research statement is like there are certain grants that are really specific to undergraduate institutions, like an R15, you know, is a good one that's really targeting undergraduate schools from NIH that have bioscience programs. But the one thing that can actually be quite liberating is sometimes I feel more like an inventor now than I am a researcher. Like I kind of get to bounce around to like whatever is the curious topic of the week, which for me is kind of fun. Like if I'm like, oh, well, students came to me and they're like, we want to do this robotics thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay, like we could try that. And then I can just kind of focus my energy on that for a bit. And then that kind of becomes its own little thing. And if I can spin it into a paper, that's great. But you know, that can be its whole thing. People will kind of go down the teaching pedagogy path of like you can write papers about, you know, teaching pedagogy, but you can have a lot of freedom sometimes in terms of what research is. So keep that in mind, you know, in terms of writing these things. Have something that feels realistic and know that probably the first 2 years you won't do any research. You're just going to be teaching and getting your feet under you in that regard. Sorry for all of the text here, but I want to make sure that when you get these slides and you look at this later, I know it's like, oh, there's a lot of text, but I want to make sure that you have this as like a reference. So I'll make sure that you have these slides. One of the questions was, what are the best professional development opportunities for postdocs who want to improve their teaching skills. So I kind of have a list of attend any events. And I think there were some really great events that the Career Development Office had when I was a postdoc. And so I think, Hannah and Bruce are going to be amazing resources for you. Bruce definitely helped me with my application. He definitely gave me good advice. And that was true of the other people that were, whose offices were around mine that I asked. Like I didn't just ask the PI, I asked the other faculty I knew in that area, right? Like, okay, I'm going to go ask so and so because they're kitty corner from me and I know them and they're going to have some different advice. So talk to people about your application. You'll get some good advice there. Any event that is going to talk about teaching pedagogy and methods. I know there was one at one point that they had that I went to when I was a postdoc that was really good because then you can talk about things that are current in your teaching statement. Like, oh, we're going to use a think, pair, share, and you can use the right phrase for it and you know what that activity looks like. So that's a good one. Definitely get involved with clubs or groups that are going to help you explain science in an accessible way. If you're out here, Western Colorado, we have a lot of rural students. Some of them have had, I would say a range of different experiences based on the size of their high school and just like very variable resources. So just trying to find good analogies for things and breaking things down for someone who's learning it and understanding it for the first time. Having practice with that definitely will serve you well. And then the last thing is if there are events, I knew they used to have these on this campus. I would imagine they still do. Sometimes NIH or NSF would have like a Know Your Institute event or a Know This Kind of Grant event. Just knowing what's out there and what opportunities exist can be helpful. For example, as I mentioned before, the R15 is really specific to trying to help people at smaller institutions with bioscience programs and they're really, you're only eligible for this if you receive fairly limited or really no other NIH support. So if you're at a small school and that school doesn't get a lot of NIH dollars, it could be something that you could apply for that could be a really good fit. Another question I got was, can teaching experience or mentorship experience in other countries be considered? And the short answer is yes. The long answer is always kind of with a however. One concern that we've had in the past or been on committees where people had this concern, is maybe wherever that they were, whatever that country is, the standards are different, the expectations are different. So one thing that you want to do is convince the committee that you understand what the expectations would be in the United States. So like this could be not necessarily teaching a class in the United States, but if you can at least be like, oh, I've shadowed a class in the US or I've taken a class in the US, you kind of know then like, okay, at least at CU Denver or CU Anschutz, I know what the expectations are for one of these classes. I can speak to that pretty confidently. And then it's very easy for you to make that link, right? I know what's expected here. It's easy for me to teach to that. So that's one thing that I would point out that I think is worth addressing. As far as I got kind of a statement here of kind of asking me to comment on workload, course load, kind of negotiating for that, pay scales, promotions, those kinds of things. So I have a tenure track job. As you could see, there was some research expected with it. What that research looks like is very different from what that research would look like on your campus. But it is on there nonetheless. So course load, let's kind of start with that. Course load will vary between institutions. So for example, CMU faculty teach 4-4, but I know that CU Boulder teaching faculty teach 3-3. I know that because we have a partnership program. So there are just differences, kind of in that regard. One thing that you can negotiate for after they would offer you the job is maybe a reduced course load in the first year or the first semester. And that's just especially if you are asked to develop things, right? Like if you are asked to develop a new program, ask if they can pay you over the summer to go in and set up those labs and start working on those teaching materials and learn the teaching software, right? Like, are you using Canvas or are you using D2L? Like, what is the tool that you're going to use for your communicating information to your students? So oftentimes, they'll try to find a way to make it a little bit easier the first year, the first semester. That's pretty common. A lot of departments, if you're coming into a program that's well established, they will give new hires multiple sections of the same class. So if you were like teaching in chemistry here, they'd say like, great, welcome to chemistry. You're going to teach 2 sections of Chem 101 because we want to make sure that you're only prepping for one class. The more the However, like the increasing the number of unique preparations that you have to prepare for each week, to prepare, grade, set up, have that material fresh, definitely increases your workload. So they try to make it a little easier for you in the beginning to make sure that that you can get your feet under you. One thing that is nice is I get paid a 9 month salary, but I have full benefits and it pays out over 12 months. So I have full benefits over 12 months. It pays out over that time frame. I get the summers off. So I always tell people like I can't complain too much about like on paper the amount of time I have off. Do I take all of that time off? No. I feel like I'm always busy with things. But we don't have any obligation, at least in our department, to teach it all in the summer. They don't request it at all. Our programs are tiny. So faculty approach this a couple different ways. Some faculty at our institution, they travel with their families. If they're both teaching faculty, they take their kids, they road trip, they have amazing experiences. Other people really love to do research or they do consulting, and they'll find little projects to do over the summer. The salary, I feel like, it should be appropriate for where you live. I would expect it to be less than an R1 institution. Tenure track salaries, at least in my department, are around 90K to 100K, depending on sort of your experience and where you're at. So they're pretty good. And then if you are maybe in a different department like chemistry or something else, maybe you're looking more at like 70K. So typically you'll find engineering salaries and CS salaries are a little higher. But a lot of this is consistent with what you would find, on Glassdoor or something like that. The cost of living is a little bit higher in Denver than Grand Junction, but not sort of significantly. So like 3 to 4%, which I was actually surprised. But I will say the cost of living in Grand Junction has gone up considerably since I've lived here. So it's gone up a lot in the past few years. We've been like consistently rated as like a good place to retire. So I will say that made buying a house really frustrating, but that's maybe a rant for a different time. But yeah, it was good. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. If sometimes I know having a dollar amount out there is kind of helpful, and knowing kind of the context for that is good too. Another question I got was, how difficult is it to get into teaching related careers when a majority of your postgraduate work has been research oriented? So I would say, like, kind of going back to some of the other stuff, like I didn't teach at all. So like I didn't teach at all in grad school. I didn't teach at all until I taught that one class, until like I had my desert revelation and I was like, I want to mentor people. Like I don't want to be part of the research machine. I want to be in the classroom. And so what I will say is like, it's not that hard to get into this career, but you do kind of have to convince the search committee of a couple things. The first one is that you have to teach them, that you have to convince the search committee that you have teaching skills, even if they are a bit limited, and that you are committed and excited to working to grow and develop those skills. That you're like, you recognize where you're at, you're excited about this, about the opportunity to grow, and that you are going to put work into growing as an educator. And everyone that I work with loves to learn. We have great teaching professional development kinds of workshops and stuff that I go to, and they're really fun. And then we take some of that back to our classrooms, and it's great. So like, if you can convince someone that like you have some teaching skills, even if they're not a ton, but you're excited to develop them, then they're like, okay, could be good, maybe taking a risk on this person, even though they don't have a ton of skills. Their passion is going to get them through it. Like, I like this. And then the other thing that I think you want to think about is convincing them. And this was actually something I was told after they hired me, that like they were really worried about with me, because it was very clear when they looked at my application that I was being groomed to go to R1. And they looked at my job like experience, and they were just kind of like, there were a few people who were like, I had someone point blank ask me like, are you using this job to just get to a research thing? Like, is your end goal research? And I remember telling someone in an interview, like, this was a very intentional choice to leave the research machine to be at a small school, a small teaching focused school. And it's not that I don't do research here, but again, that research looks very different. And and so I think to some extent, when your history is all research, you have a little bit of extra pressure to convince the search committee that teaching will be your priority, that research isn't going to be your passion, that it's something you're going to enjoy doing to stay current, but teaching will be the reason that you want to be here. And so that means really convincing them that you intend to stay. So like asking good questions about the place, like convince them that you want to build a life wherever this institution is, I think is a good thing. And convince them that you're a good fit for their program. So like that can mean a couple of different things, but this idea of being a good fit for something is often something to think about. One of the other pieces of this comment kind of got into this idea of promotion scale. Promotion can be a little bit different. It's somewhat institution specific, but I will say that there are different promotion structures and pay for instructors versus tenure track faculty. So like my position is a tenure track faculty position. We have instructors here. The instructors here, they are sometimes referred to as 0.8s, but that's only because that 20% that's expected of research, they don't have to do. So sometimes they're called that. The instructors here I think have their own promotion structure, which I think is really great. They do a lot of work, but that is something to kind of just recognize. The expectations are very different. One thing to maybe look for, big universities can have teaching assistant professor positions that do exist. Like it's not just like instructor or tenure track. I think it kind of used to be that way at one point in time. Now I think you're really finding, people really regardless of institution size, trying to really value the teaching faculty that they have. So what my understanding is, a lot of times these teaching assistant professors or teaching associate professors are going to have similar, promotion levels of, assistant or associate or I guess full teaching professor. What you should know is like if you do get a job somewhere, oftentimes there are, a faculty handbook that'll explain really clearly what all the expectations are going to be for tenure and promotion. And these kinds of questions actually make really good questions at a phone interview. So like they show someone that you're engaged if you're kind of like, oh, can you tell me a little bit more about, the promotion structure and the expectations, prior to tenure, what do you have to do? Because what I'm telling you, definitely very relevant for the engineering and computer science department at CMU, but maybe not as relevant for whatever institution you would choose to apply for. There's a few other pieces of advice that I think are maybe just good to throw out there. One kind of good question, I think, that makes people think, you want to think about a little bit before you write your documents, and you might see questions to this effect at an on-site interview, is what is your sort of 2-year plan or your 1-year plan and your 5-year plan? Your 5-year plan is really what is going to get you to the point to apply for tenure. If it's a tenure track job, you apply for tenure after 5 years. So you want to show, like what is it you're going to do in that year? So if it's the 5-year plan, you're probably really thinking like, okay, you want to write down some ideas that maybe appear in your research statement or be prepared to answer in person of how you could engage students in research projects. And so you might say like, yeah, year 2, I'm going to try to, identify one student and offer a research independent study class in a topic I really like. And I'm going to involve that student in this topic, see how it goes, and then try to kind of develop what that research agenda could be from there. But that's like a good place for a lot of faculty to start. Another thing is to consider the fields that you could be successful teaching in. So one thing you may have noticed, right, that like I'm a biomedical engineer through and through. My background is biomedical engineering. My PhD is in bioengineering. I am a bioengineer for sure. However, not a lot of small institutions have biomedical engineering programs. These tend to be programs that are offered at bigger schools. So for me, it was really thinking about like, what are the skills that I have to offer? What is my brand? And then how do I play to those strengths when I'm, putting my ideas on paper and I'm selling myself in an interview to say, look, it says bioengineer, but I can totally teach these electrical and computer engineering classes you need. So that's something that I think is very much worth considering. The next thing, and there's kind of a couple of things in here, this was something that I think they told me that I did a nice job when I applied doing this, but this was something I got a lot of help with from Bruce, was if you kind of have to sell yourself because your degree name is maybe different, is if you can write a personalized cover letter that really convinces them you are a good fit for this institution and can convince them that you're interested, like you know who that student population might be, that's huge. If you can demonstrate, right, that you are really passionate about teaching and mentoring, like those are the letters I actually want to read on a search committee. I do not want to read this generic letter that is like, I need a job. And I'm like, don't we all? Like, it's not what you are passionate about in terms of who people want to talk to. So, think about the connections you have. You might have to dig a little bit into the school, but like CMU, for example, like the mission of CMU is to serve the Western Slope. So the university just launched this big initiative called the CMU Promise, where, families that make under, I think they've upped it now from 75 maybe to 80. I should know the new number, but I don't. There's some number of money. If your family makes less than this, then tuition is covered for you. And so it's pretty cool. I think like for me, I'm from a small town. So I could be like, I'm from a small town. I can relate to small town kids. I'm from a town of 7,000 people in rural Wisconsin. Sure. Like I would imagine some of the concerns small towns have are the same, regardless of where you're at geographically. I know other people who talked about, being first gen. And really, we have a huge first gen population on the Western Slope at CMU. They can relate to those students in a very unique way. And if you have those connections, if you can point those out in your cover letter, that makes me, as someone who's been on a lot of search committees, want to talk to you. And I'm like, they may not have a ton of teaching experience. It sounds like maybe they discovered this kind of late, but they seem passionate. They seem like they could be a good fit. They come across as enthusiastic. They know who we are and what we're about. And that makes me more interested to hear what you have to say. The last piece of advice here before we're almost done is really, if you have your heart set on a very particular job, one of the best pieces of advice that I got, it's hard for me to say now if I think this is the reason I got the job or got a phone interview, but one of the other faculty members on that campus actually said, I'm like, do you have any advice for like trying to network when you don't have an in, like, but you really want an in because like this is the job you really, really want. And this is that's this job for me. Like I really wanted this job. My husband loves mountain biking. He really wanted to live in Grand Junction. The school seemed like the right size for me. Like it was just ticking all the boxes. And, and his advice was email the contact person for the search and ask them something that shows you've genuinely thought about the job. And then, it'll probably take them too long to write an email. You don't want to waste their time. So just tell them they can call you and have a conversation. So I remember before the phone interview, like I'd already talked to the person who was the head of the search and they knew I was really interested. And then when they actually sat down with the committee to review the applications, they were like, oh, I've talked to Michelle. She seems really interested. And so like it can be kind of a good thing. Like if you can make a good impression over the phone, if you're confident in that, it can be a good way to kind of get a little name recognition to make yourself stand out in a big pool of applicants. Because I've definitely had searches here where we've had 70 to 90 people apply. And we're not even like a big popular school. I don't think too many people have heard of CMU necessarily. So kind of just sort of an interesting thing to throw out there. All right. I think I probably said enough. I just want to kind of conclude with, if you have any specific questions for me, I'm happy to talk about them. You're welcome to add me on LinkedIn if you'd like to do that. You can also send me a personal email. I'm happy to talk to anyone from that campus about what this experience has been, give you a little advice, but really like the postdoc and the career development office are awesome. Like utilize the resources that you have on that campus because it's really quite unique and quite special. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. So once again, if you guys have questions, you can always drop them in the chat or you can unmute, preferably also maybe turn your video on so we can see your face and ask any questions. We have plenty of time for Q&A. And as people are thinking, I do have a quick question. Um, you mentioned that I love that last piece of advice you had about reaching out to the search committee and asking a question that's shown that you have thought about the job. Could you maybe share like what was the question that you asked that kind of like because I could imagine the quality of that question could make someone maybe much more likely to respond or be like, oh, okay, that was something that was like very general. So maybe you could share with us what was the question that you asked.
I think I had two. I think one of them was I had noticed that, that research was an expectation of this tenure track job. And so, I had asked a question like, I'm kind of curious what what the research expectation is in this position. It looks like there's probably a heavy teaching load. Would you be willing to share with me like give me some more information about what kind of research people are doing in this department? And that really was like a good conversation for me to hear, and what I really heard was, people in this department are free to follow the passion projects that they have. Like you're not committed to building a lab around this one R1 that you really need to get and following in this vein. There's a lot of freedom to follow things and have those things change. And to me, that ended up being really great. So that was, I think, one of the questions that I had. I may have had another question just about maybe tenure or something like that. But yeah, it was just kind of a good thing. And then then the conversation kind of naturally spiraled like, oh, had you been to Grand Junction before? And I was like, oh yeah, like I'd been out there to mountain bike 2 years ago and went out to 18 Road and near Fruta and it was great. And so it was kind of like they knew I knew where it was. And this sounds silly, but like we definitely get applications from people who think we are close to Denver. And I'm like, we are not close to Denver. In fact, if it snows, we could not be further from Denver. If like there is anything stopping I-70, like it is not a drive you're gonna do every day. Like you are not gonna live in Denver and come out here. So sometimes like it's kind of interesting, like at least for us, like we're kind of in an interesting spot geographically. So sometimes we ask people questions in the search committee to be like, have you looked at where we are on a map? Like, are you good with this? Because there's definitely been people who've moved out here and been like, man, the desert is not for me. And you don't want to get excited about having a new colleague, join your team when this really isn't going to be a good fit for them. So, like to some extent, that plays a factor into things. But it is sort of worth considering if it's a smaller known institution, not in a huge city, like they may want to know that you know where it is. So
That's good advice. Let people know that you have been to the city before, or at least Googled it.
that you can at least be like, I know where this is on a map, and I'm okay with that. Like I've looked at photos of what it might look like there. Like that kind of stuff is good. Okay, so I got a question. It looks like, what is a typical day like for you and your position? How many days a week are you on campus? So I will say when I first started is a little different. A typical day in the first year was a little rough because I had a lot of unique preps and new classes and it was a new program. But so I would say your first year or 2 years, like, people will say like you just need to survive. And there is really a lot of truth to that. It's true, I think, with most jobs is like you have to just kind of figure out what it is that's going to make it work for you. But now, right, like 5 years in, I would say like my typical day is I would maybe teach 2 or 3 classes each day. Fridays I have only one class, which is kind of nice. I'm expected to have 5 office hours throughout the week, so I'll have maybe 3 hours in class, I'll have office hours. If I have some grading I want to do, I'll close my door, try to do that grading, but oftentimes I leave my door open and students can find me. um, Generally, I'll meet with a student club, like with the officers, once or twice a week. And that's really from a work-life balance perspective, is a lot of our student clubs like to meet at 6 or 7 in the evening. And I'm like, that is me time. Like, I want to be home with my husband, cooking dinner, hanging out, riding my bike. I do not want to be on campus. So it takes a lot for them to convince me to come stay on campus after 5. So I'm really only on campus from, I would say, like 9 to 5 most days. come home, make dinner, do that thing. And then sometimes I would say maybe once or twice a week, I might spend, an hour or two grading in the evening. And then if I have other bigger projects going on, or I'm writing exams or grading an exam, I might spend, most of a Saturday or something doing that. But it's work that I could do from anywhere. It's work that I could have done earlier in the week, but unlike my students, I am not immune to procrastination, so I may leave a few things to the end and then, just take it home on the weekend and get it done. But it's for me, it's gotten to be, pretty much more balanced than I would say it once was. But it was really trying to figure out what are the things that I can say no to, right? And then for me, that was really asking the question of what are the important things to say yes to, and then the other things are just kind of naturally become like a, if you really, really need me, then fine, but I'd rather not. So it's not bad. I would say it's 9 to 5 most weeks, maybe a couple hours in the evenings here or there. And then there are sometimes Saturday like recruitment events I have to go to. So I would say maybe like every other Saturday when it's kind of really the middle of the semester and things are roaring, I'm doing something for at least part of the day. So
Hi, Vishnu. This is Dr. Pumurali Langovan. I'm a postdoc in Department of Radiology. The thing is that I just want to know, I have a teaching experience of more than 10 years in my home country, but I don't have any teaching experience in United States. So my first question is, will I be eligible for any kind of a faculty position in United States with my teaching experience in my home country, India? Or whether they will specifically need a teaching experience of minimum of maybe from 6 months or 1 year in United States
that's a
for
great that's
getting.
a great question. So at least on the committees that I've been on, we wouldn't view that as a bad thing at all. We'd be like, awesome, we have someone that has teaching experience. Like, yes. Um, what I would say is, I think it's good to say you would definitely check the teaching experience box. The one question you may get that I think you want to be prepared to answer is, do you understand how the expectations may be different in the United States? And so that doesn't mean you would have to teach a class here, but it's worth at least sitting in on a class. So if like the PI that you're working for is teaching a class, or someone in your group is teaching a class, and maybe this is not realistic for you to teach a class based on how you're being, sponsored or funded, go to one of their classes and just, make sure that you're like, yeah, this is either to you, it might be like, yeah, this is exactly like how it was for me. Or you might be kind of like, oh, like how things are done here maybe is a little bit different. So I would just say like be prepared to talk about that, and then you can say like, oh, I've sat in on a couple classes in the US. I'm super confident that my teaching experience in India applies. And they'll be like, thumbs up. So
Thank you. Thank you so much.
mhm,
So really, it was a very informative session. Thank you. Thank you.
you're very welcome.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kim. I'm a postdoc in the developmental section of developmental biology. Yeah, thanks. It was a really informative talk. I had a couple or like two questions that are kind of related.
Okay.
One being, how much mentorship do you receive like in your early years from other faculty members or from people in the department just to kind of like, or like what kind of check-ins are you doing essentially to measure your own like success and project progress, because it's a little challenging coming from a postdoc position to then going into this teaching heavy position and kind of getting a measure of, am I doing enough? Am I like teaching well, other than maybe getting some student evaluations? Like how do you, if you're willing to grow, how do you get feedback to then like help you grow, you know?
Yeah, those are great questions. So one thing I would encourage you to ask if you get an interview for a teaching position, ask what kind of mentorship and support they provide for early career faculty. One thing I think the pandemic showed at a lot of institutions and a lot of places was areas where systems needed improving, and that CMU was no exception to that. what they found during the time when they had hired me was there really was no formal mentoring program in place. There was one person who would check in with people for a Zoom call at 6 months and again at 2 years. And whatever else happened was kind of up to your department. And our department was so small and casual that at least in the fall, it was like, oh, we're all going to leave at 4 on Friday and go have a beer at such and such brewery. And then they would just kind of check in with you that way. But when things went online for the pandemic, it was like all that stopped, right? And then going into the following fall, it was like we weren't going to a bar to have a beer and hang out. We were not doing that. Now the university has turned around and said we need to formalize our mentoring process. And so they actually run like a whole teaching thing where they'll like talk about like course development and curriculum development and using AI to be that. And they'll have all of these like specialty workshops. It's very formalized. They'll actually put faculty in like peer coaching pods where you go watch each other classes and get feedback. And it's actually started to become a requirement of all pre-tenure faculty to have somebody come observe your class, preferably the department head and maybe others. It was something I did informally, even though it wasn't required. Like I had some colleagues down the hall that I respected, could tell that the students really respected them. And I was like, hey, Francisco, will you come to my class? Like, I'm just curious, like, what do you think? And he listened and, we met afterwards and we had a good conversation. And he was like, sometimes you pick up a color marker and then you just keep writing with it. Like, he's like, write everything on the board in black marker. I can't see the green from the back. And I was like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. Okay. So like sometimes you get really good feedback. And so like the university has really started to embrace that. And so I think you'll find other institutions, I know CSU had this when I was a grad student, will have like kind of teaching centers that do a really good job. And at least here, they've really formalized the mentoring process and make sure that like people are actually reaching out to faculty to be like, how are you doing? Like, are you checking in? And mine was very informal. Like I said, in the fall, it was like we'd go have a beer, or I would go have lunch with a couple of faculty members every Friday. And they're always just like, you doing okay? You figuring this out? Or have any questions? And that was always a really positive thing. So it could look very informal. I'm kind of glad to see it's gotten more formal because I think sometimes it's really nice to have someone outside your department also come to your class, also get to know you, right? And you just get a different perspective where it's kind of like you're not in the trenches with this person, but you definitely kind of feel like, okay, they're gonna give my best interest at heart, even if it might be in conflict with what the department interest is. They know you, right? So they're gonna tell you what they think. So in that regard, I definitely did some reaching out and people were very responsive when I reached out. Like I have a lot of friends in the department now. Like I work with really great people. But it definitely I was glad to see that it became a formalized thing. So wherever you would apply, ask, is there any kind of mentorship program or what kind of support do you give for beginning faculty? And in some places it's very formal and in other places it may not be. And my advice would be if it's not, don't let that necessarily turn you away. What you might decide to do is like say like, okay, find 2 or 3 people in the department that you trust and like and say like, can we have lunch every Friday? Can we go get coffee every Friday? Can we do something together? And then it just will naturally come up in conversation. They're going to be like, how you doing? And you'll be like, okay, I had this crazy thing happen in class. Actually had a crazy thing this week. I had someone break 2 DC power supplies in a span of a week. And I've never had anyone break one. It's like breaking the hammer. I'm like, it's like you broke a hammer. Like this thing is like, I don't know how you break this. They're like, what are you going to do about it? And I was like, I don't know. And I still had that. And even still, like for me, I just go down the hall, pop into one of my colleagues' office, and I'm like, all right, this crazy thing happened. This is what I think I should do about it. What do you think? Like, does that sound sane? And they'll be like, yeah, you're good or not. So I think the mentoring never really stops. You see something new, you still, your instinct might still be go talk to your peers. And I think you'll find that helpful. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Thank you. That was helpful.
It looks like there was another one in the chat that says, is there any kind of temporary faculty position at CMU other than tenure track? In that case, will universities sponsor visa for international candidates? So we have fewer visiting professor positions than other institutions. I know sometimes you can look for like a visiting faculty member. In From what I understand, and this is probably true in a lot of places, most universities won't hire someone in an adjunct position who would need visa sponsorship because the cost of the visa just doesn't make sense with what the cost of the adjunct pay would be per class. But as far as like temporary positions here, I did do a quick search before I came on. I think most of our searches are winding down at this point, like they're in the interviewing process with candidates. So those positions aren't open. Um, but as far as I know, like not a ton that would necessarily be temporary here. You might find that instructor positions, if there isn't a formal tenure process, might be more like annual appointments. So it could be a little bit more temporary in that regard. But hopefully that answers the other question in the chat.
And then I got a question sent to me as well. So this question is, does the teaching position that you want to apply to need to relate closely to what you got your PhD in? For example, I got a PhD in immunology, but I am thinking of teaching chemistry or biology.
So my advice is no. For me, biomed and ECE, like I don't know, some people might tell you they can feel really far apart, especially if you're more of like a biomechanics kind of person. So my advice in that spot would be if you feel like you read the job description, and oftentimes like they might say like we're looking for someone, and they'll put maybe a wish list item who has expertise in X area. If you're like, oh yeah, like I can do that, make sure that comes through on your skills of like just being like sell the skills that you have rather than the degree. And I even tell this to my undergrad students. I think for me, it was emphasized early on because biomedical engineering is so broad that people are like, I don't even know what you can do. And so you were always trying to explain and qualify, well, like, really, I'm this kind of biomedical engineer with this skill set doing this kind of thing. But I kind of think that's true for everybody. Like, convince them that, like, if you pull up the curriculum, so I would say go to the department website for like the programs you would apply for, pull up the classes, because one question we almost always ask in our search committee interview is like, what classes can you teach? And what we love is when someone clearly has the program sheet printed out in front of them and they can just list the course numbers. And we're like, yep, 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 because you're calling it exactly what we call it. So, like, that's awesome. I would say go do that digging and be like, these are what the classes are. You don't have to be comfortable teaching everything, but like apply for the job knowing that if somebody asked you that question, right? Like, what are the classes that I would be willing to teach or want to teach, that you could pull up the curriculum and be like, I would be super comfortable teaching all of these classes. They might ask you a question like, what class would you be, interested in developing? And so you might be interested, and I'm totally outside of my depth here, so this may or may not even make sense, but like, like the chemistry of drugs. I don't know if that works for immunology. Maybe that is way too broad. I don't know, but maybe there's some intersection there. Or there's some like very specific thing, or maybe immunology even of itself, right? Like intro to immunology could be like a great elective class for someone in chemistry or someone in biology. So like I think that kind of thing could be great. It really just kind of comes down to the skills. And if you look at the classes and you can convince them that you have the expertise to teach classes they need you to teach, then you're a great fit. Yeah.
I have another question. In terms of the research side of your time, like 25% research, and kind of when you're writing your application and writing this research plan that's tailored towards undergraduates and being able to be completed by undergraduates, what kind of funding do you get from the university for that? And kind of what are you working with in terms of being able to fund your research? Because you can write up a plan that seems reasonable in terms of like time and effort put in to be done like in a timeline by undergraduate students, but then you might not necessarily have the like supplies or the budget to conduct that type of research at the university that you're applying to. So how does that kind of stuff work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I read this stuff as when we have candidates, right, who are applying, I'm really looking at the teaching one with like, does this person seem solid. And then I look at the research plan and I'm like, yeah, okay. Knowing that the moment they get here, they might throw it out the window because it might not quite work here. When I'm looking at that, what I'm looking for when I read it is that like they have a good sense of what they think maybe could be accomplished with some undergrads, that they maybe know what kind of funding mechanisms they would be eligible in applying for. So, like I might look for you to see like, oh, like, are you saying like, at years 2 or 3, I might apply for an R15 to see if I can get this. That's a really good question to ask at a job interview, or even call the person on the listing for the job application and say, or not call, but email them and say like, I see research as an expectation. Like I think this position seems really great. What kind of research support is there? I will say at CMU, like it's pretty low. We have about $1,000 a year that are faculty professional development funds that I could use to sink into a research project, or I could sort of hoard them and go to a conference from year to year. I was in a good position where like the main research tool that I needed was like a good computer. So when they offer you a job, you can negotiate for a bit of a startup package, even if it is a teaching school. And you could say, okay, like you had this stuff outlined as possible research projects. Like I'm going to negotiate for, I want a bench in this teaching lab where I can just leave my stuff set up. I want, like $5,000 so I could buy supplies. And I'm willing to have an independent study with a couple of students to try some things. Um, I think you won't find that you necessarily, at least at most, I mean, it might be a different case at like a big school where like $5,000 is a drop in the bucket. But at a smaller school, like they're going to be like, well, how about $3,000? And you'll be like, yeah, okay, I'll make it work for $3,000. Um, so I do think that, you can ask for things on startup, modest things though, usually like a good computer, maybe access to a little bit of space. And also, like, if your work would involve animals or involve other kinds of things, it's good to know what resources are available. So, like, I was looking at putting together an R15, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I will want to use some mice. And so I reached out to the biology department here, and I was like, I see that we have an IACUC. I don't know of any animal research going on this campus. Like, is there a space for this? Because like engineering kind of is in its own building. And so I wandered over there and they had an animal room, they had a spot, everything was like maintained. There wasn't an on-site person. And so they were like, if you get mice, like you got to feed them and take care of the cages and whatever. But it can be done. And I was like, okay, well, now I know. So it might look different. I know Anschutz is pretty cushy in that regard in terms of what we have there. So yeah, think about what you might ask for in a startup, and wouldn't necessarily bank on a ton of support. A lot of universities will have, kind of last thought on this is, we have a faculty professional development fund where we can request up to $5,000 for some kind of purpose, whether it's research, scholarly, conference travel, something like that. And the ones that tend to get funded the most are the ones that demonstrate we're also engaging students. So the money benefits both the faculty and the students. It's a teaching school, so those are the things that they like to fund. But you could totally ask for like research things. So a lot of schools will have like maybe a small little thing here or there. It can be helpful too if you're developing a class, like you're like, oh, I would teach this class for you. You can ask for stuff that serves a dual purpose, like I can use this item in this class, and the department head might look at you and be like, I know you really want this for this reason, and you'll be like, uh-huh. And they'll be like, all right, you can have it for both. Like, and that's not the end of the world either. So if you're a little bit creative about it, you can stretch your money pretty well. Thanks.
All right, I have a question from Bruce. He had to jump off, but he did send me a question to ask you if we had time. So he asked if you were surprised by any of your responsibilities when you started, or if looking back, there was anything that you wished you had done during your postdoc or during your PhD, or learned more about before jumping into a teaching focused position.
Oh man. I I mean, I think one thing that, I wish I didn't really appreciate the difference when I started. I was kind of like full of energy, like I'm gonna do this, and that's just also kind of me, like I'm gonna do it, Ron. Um, but like starting a program was definitely there was a lot of extra little things that I didn't expect to have to do that sort of came along with being the person for a while. Like picking out lab equipment was an extra time sink, and like people, we had an event where all this lab equipment got sent in, and I had to sit down and try it all and be like, what do I want to build this lab in? I get to spec out a whole teaching lab. Like, what am I going to pick? Where are we going to spend our money? And it was kind of like little stuff like that did kind of take time. um One thing that I think I also didn't really think about is like the advising piece can be kind of time consuming sometimes. I also get emails from students that like I think sometimes you forget what you need to tell people. And like I get emails from students that are like text messages, and I was like, I would never have sent this to a professor. Like and then during the pandemic when things were like kind of rough, I would get students who had just like heavy things happening, and they would come tell me about it. And it just like, man, it took a toll on my mental health at one point. And I finally got really good at kind of putting boundaries in. And like if someone comes in and they look like they're going through something, I'm like, you look like you're going through something. Or if they start a conversation with like, I'm not sure if I should tell you this, I say, I'm a mandated reporter. Let me stop you right here. Would you like to talk to someone in, the wellness center? And I'm like, is what you really want from me an extension? And they're like, yes. And I was like, granted. When can you give it to me? Because I won't even let them share it with me anymore, because it would bring me down, and it was just a lot. So I would say kind of there's always surprises that are just going to kind of come up in a job. For me, it was like sometimes surprising. Like I was always flattered, I guess, that students felt comfortable coming to me with stuff. But at the same time, like also helping them understand, like, I'm not a therapist. Please don't come to me with everything. Like I'm not equipped to handle that. Was good. But no, I think I kind of didn't really recognize like what would all go into something totally new. And having colleagues that were in other departments in very established programs, instead of being like the night before a class, it being like 11 p.m. And because the first year, like I said, was a little nuts. And I'm thinking like, okay, I need to make 3 lectures for tomorrow. Okay, I'm teaching this class and this class. What are we doing? And you're sitting there and you're making your slides, because at some point you can plan ahead all you want, you're still going to be doing that. And and you're doing this for all these classes. It was I don't think I always appreciated like really the time that you could put in. And I had peers tell me like, some days you're just gonna have to go in and wing it. And I was like, no, it's not my style. I need to teach true to my style. And at some point I was like, look back on that, and it was like, was it really worth it staying up until like 2 a.m. to fix the bug in the code that I couldn't see because I was tired, because I really wanted to have this perfect example for the next class? And I'm like, maybe not. But in the moment, I think there are certain mistakes you make your first year, really wanting to have things be a particular way that, if someone tells you get it right 70% of the time, and you're like, do a C or better job at your job, you're like, no, I've always been an A student. I'm getting an A. Like this is going to be right 99% of the job. You hold my coffee or two, like this is happening. And that was a little bit of me kind of shooting myself in the foot at times, but it is something that I did learn, and I think part of it comes with just experience in the job as you get more comfortable like with the subject matter. And then at that point you really do feel like, oh, they want to talk about this today. All right, fine. Let's have this conversation. And then you go into it. So yeah. I got, what have been some of your proudest accomplishments since being a faculty member? Oh, um, let's see. I had a good one this year. I have a student project from a class that we published in a peer review journal. I got invited to submit to biosensors, and we got a publication through the door. And it was the students, undergrad students, were the first few authors, and like that was something I was super proud of. Um, I've been super proud of just like honestly starting the program. And sometimes it's like the moments of like you put a lot of time in helping people with projects, and sometimes you want to pull your hair out. And then I'll occasionally get like thank you notes from students, and those are kind of like these like little proud moments where you're just like, I did right by the student, and that feels really good. So I would say, definitely helping my students succeed in that has been huge. I help my Engineers Without Borders students have their first international project, and so they've traveled to Ecuador now 2 times. So that's been really cool to help students from rural places who, for many of them, like they had to go get a passport. Like they've never left the country. They may have never even left the state much. And so like it was a big deal for them to go to Ecuador. And so that was really cool. So I think I've been proud mostly of, you know, getting to a point where I would now say like happily, like I'm happily thriving. But I'm also very proud of what I've been able to help students do. And that's been really great.
That's a great question, by the way. A+ question.
Well, if
Okay.
I was gonna say, like, if people think of something, they are welcome to email me. Please jot my email down. You can add me on LinkedIn if you want. Hopefully this was helpful for you in terms of thinking about what this kind of career could be like and kind of thinking about what you might get yourself signed up for. One thing that I think is, really worth considering is, are you entering a program that's established or not? Because that can really mean the support you would get is different. The pro of really creating your own thing is you can create something that you really stand behind. And you have some freedom in the curriculum and the classes to really align something that, in my case, very lab heavy, very hands-on, very true to my values in terms of teaching. Wouldn't have had that luxury had it been a program that already existed necessarily. I'd have to teach to what's there. But starting a new program does come with a lot of long nights. So
yeah, I can only imagine. But thank you so much for joining us. And I just wanted to do a quick plug for those of you who are still here. We are hoping this summer to sort of bring back a program called Learning How to Teach, which is really intended for like late PhD students and postdocs who are like very confident they will be teaching or are currently teaching. So that could be another great way if you don't have maybe hands-on teaching experience. Another way to show that you are dedicated to teaching is completion of that program. So like I said, that's something we're hoping to introduce in the summer. So just check your email. You can always email me or the career development office, and I can put you on like the wait list for that as well. All right, but we'll stop there. And thank you, Michelle, again so much. This was incredibly, incredibly helpful. I learned some stuff about teaching focused positions, and I'm excited to like share some of your advice to the students and postdocs I advise in the future. And yeah, and also congratulations again on tenure.
thanks. I took the Learn How to Teach one and I will recommend it. So happy to
I
hear
did
you're
too. It
rebooting
was great.
it. Great. Well, have a great one, everybody. And good luck with all your future job search efforts and finding the thing that's going to be a good fit for you.